So, of course, as always, um, people are panicking about Reform UK. And as my response always is, if Reform UK is so popular, if they're doing so well in the polls, right, they must have done well in the recent by-elections, because after all, since the general election, there have been 180 plus by-elections at this point. There's been quite a few. So you'd think maybe if they are as like popular as people are saying, and then that this is, Farage is going to be like the next prime minister. Um, why have they only won 7 out of those 180 plus by-elections? Yeah. Um, answer and riddle me that, Batman. Riddle me that if you can. But of course, people are yet worrying about this now. And of course, there's been some news again that Farage has come out and said that he's ruled out a Tory reform pact. And also, this caused Kimi Badnoch to come out and also rule out a Tory reform pact. And as we keep on saying, that small chunk of right wing votes is now split between two parties. You know, can't can't really win when your vote's that split, can you? Hmm. And like I say, only 7 victories in by elections. 180 plus there have been since the general election. However, of course, back to, of course, the Conservative panic about this. And, of course, nowhere better to go for Conservative panic than, of course, Conservative home. As today, I'm treating you to some very interesting stuff indeed. We've got a bit of Conservative role playing going on. Yes. Giles Dilnot, the editor, the new editor, or well, I say new, he's been in it a couple of while now, but he's over there role playing how a Tory reform pact might actually go. So let's have a look at what he has to say, how he works out this role play, how this pact would go. And he doesn't think this pact is a non-starter to begin with, but he role plays it out. But it's interesting to see. So before we do get into that, please remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. Down below, of course, there are the Patreon page, there's the Buy Me Coffee link, there's the YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, there's the YouTube thank you button as well. I've already said that, and the Pony Club down below as well. And of course, thank you very much to all those people who do help support the channel that way. So let's crack on then into this. So over on Conservative Home, role playing how a Tory reform pact might be negotiated shows how hard it would be. Easily, probably the most boringest D&D campaign I can ever think of. But anyway, let's get into this, shall we? So, this weekend I conducted an experiment. How would you negotiate any kind of pact between the Tories and Reform? Officially, on either side, this isn't happening. Not a chance, no way, or not yet. Kimi Badnoch and her team have said repeatedly, why would you do a deal with people who have said that they are out to destroy you? Nigel Farage is celebrating reaching over 200,000 members at lunchtime now on a Sunday, and still rising in the opinion polls, doesn't feel the need to work with the party he distrusts, routinely describes now as yesterday's news. In the long term, of course, the maths, however, make for a very obvious temptation. Jacob Rees-Mogg has talked about it. Tatton MP Eshe McVey has also entertained the question, and even former party chairman Sir Chris Brandon Lewis has made the case with regard to the local elections to the Telegraph just this weekend, saying that if we want to defeat Labour, then the right has to find a way to come together. And the same logic applies to the locals. I just can't see that being very viable at the moment, because Kemi has been so fixated around saying absolutely no way. But the right cannot win while it is split, that's for sure. I've been saying this for a while. This isn't news to me. I've been saying this for a long time. There you go. Anyway, of course, both parties have denied the prospect of any such deal. They've had to because of just such comments, but they can also be because of last week a journalist entered a members club for lunch and by chance spotted a very small gathering of what looked like known reformists sitting with known Tory operators going on to lunch. He guessed what that might be about. Of course, this lunch did take place, and I was understandably totally unofficial, unsanctioned exploration or whatever at arm's length the bridge between the two right of centre parties can actually be built. If and when that might be necessary, nothing agreed, just chatting about what it might actually take. The more people who know what one another chatting, of course, was the word. Still, of course, this happened, and this intrigued me. So basically, a bunch of people got together and had a talk about this, and now he is intrigued by such notions. Let's see what they had to say. Let's see how this unfolded, shall we? So I decided that completely unsanctioned and purely as an intellectual political exercise, the purely intellectual political exercise, I tried to, of course, replay, of course, this discussion over Sunday lunch. Reform, of course, were well represented. I know plenty of them, and I tried to replicate what I know, of course, of the Conservative position. Another guest floated somewhere just in the middle as a useful referee. So you've got your Reform, you've got your Conservatives, and of course, you've got your control, which apparently is just one person. But okay, maybe you need a bit more for the control group if you're going to conduct such an experiment. But hey, it's his experiment. I'm sure there's nothing biased or anything that could get in the way of this, right? Anyway, there are, of course, some ground rules. This discussion took place without any hyper-tribalism, and the assumption now of these circumstances had come about where a discussion might, of course, be required. We were also honest about our own side's weaknesses. All this might be a lot harder to pull off, of course, if it were real. Indeed, what I learned was that the whole idea might be a lot harder than people may think. So, this is the reform pitch, or what the reform put forward. So, what's the reform pitch? We don't get the numbers alone to win the majority we'd really want. So, having to deal would sort the maths. Labour could be crushed by such a deal. We have the momentum. People are coming to us and not to you. The old politics is changing around the world, and it's changing towards our brand of politics. We both want to fix Whitehall and agree it doesn't work. We all know, as Labour has discovered, and of course are admitting, quote, Cummings was right, we don't want to do what people want done, and the Conservatives didn't or couldn't. This wind is now in our sails, not yours, and working with us could now help us, but might save you. We are still, of course, in relative terms, the smaller ground operation, but it is building, and in places it is now bigger than yours, or could even soon be. None of this was a surprise. It is, of course, a very valid enough premise. But again, and I would say this, given that pitch, what's in it for the Conservatives? Because, as we've said multiple times before, not all the Conservative Party would go along with this. You forget that there are Conservative moderates who are balking at the idea of like the Conservative Party going in a more hard right direction. And already those who have left the party haven't gone to reform. They've either left the party completely and become political floaters, that missing 10% we've talked about sometimes, or they've gone and joined the Lib Dems. As I always say in these discussions, I see a lot when people panic about this. Surprisingly, no one talks about the Lib Dems in all this. But there you go. So anyway, what, of course, would the Conservative pitch be? So the Conservative pitch, largely as you've seen, of course, on this site. Reform have absolutely no experience in running any level of government. And that generally matters. That is true. That would actually matter quite a lot. They have no experience running one else whatsoever. I've said this before. If Farage ever got in, he would mess up monumentally. Monumentally. That's true. They have no more detailed, thought through policies and positions than what they keep demanding for us. And of course, they know that they need to show that they can formulate any. And we all have at least 4 years to build, and a lot can happen. Then, very true. The next election is 4 years away. Do you really think Farage can carry this momentum for the next 4 years? I don't think he can. Conservatives, of course, have first-hand experience of how government can be gummed up, and therefore what a genuine rewiring and overhaul might actually look like. Reform can only imagine what the real task is. So that is the Conservative pitch, that without us, you just simply could not imagine how difficult the task lies before you. We are the engineers, and you need us. It's still not a enticing pitch. I still can't see why Reform would go for that. And vice why, also, when you look at the Reform pitch we've just gone through, why would the Conservatives go through with that? Because they're both making the same argument that you need us more than we need you. At some point, something's got to give, you know? So he continues. It is not all about, of course, who has the greater will, or even the louder shouting, of course, at civil servants, or daring to think the unworkable, unthinkable. None of that is going to deliver. You won't get things done by promising things, even harder. Right now, shattered through it that it is, we have a geographical footprint on the ground. Reforms still have to actually build that. Many Conservatives think delivery is now more important than bigger promises. Reform have to maintain the momentum that they've created throughout 4 long years. And there is a tortoise and hare risk here. I've already brought that up. Do you think they can bring that up for the next 4 years? Ground game is massively important. You can see the Conservatives thinking about delivery. Well, Labour's delivering. We've got potentially one of the biggest expansion of workers' rights happening right now that is incredibly popular. If you've seen I think it's the TUC, they go into Clacton and they ask people about this bill, like, are you in favor of this? Are you in favor of this? Are you in favor of this? Well, who do you think would vote against that? And they go, oh, Nigel Farage. And they're like, oh, Nigel? Why on earth would Nigel vote against that? I thought he was one of us. Yeah, Farage is more vulnerable than people think, but there you go. So back to this. This, of course, was the basic back and forth over the meal. What many Reform fans do not appreciate is that some of the top of their party can see the Tories' case as valid too. They may not think that they need a deal and might not want one, but they get the premise. This is not a one-way street, and if it were, no discussion would ever take place. And again, even if you formed this coalition, what guarantee would you have that this coalition would stay together? I could not see that staying stable for very long, to be honest. And then, of course, you get the big question: who becomes prime minister? Do you think Nigel's going to want to share power? Do you think he's not going to make that demand that he is prime minister? So then, of course, we hit the bigger obstacles. We agreed, of course, that neither leader seems to want to work with the other. Farage and Badenoch do not seem to get on, and both see, of course, big flaws in the other. Both sides are aware that politics can change. Reform could get into a point where they don't need a deal, or the polls reach a point where the Tories have a larger, more leverage than they do now. Both sides seem very happier to currently wait and see which is it. And then we come to the biggest questions. What would a deal be? A merger? The Reformed Conservative Party? If so, who would be in charge? Biggest question of all, various forms of the electoral pact are possible, shy of a merger, but that gets you a result doesn't decide how both might govern. So as you can see, even if they do this, the question is how do they govern? How do they keep things together? What do they do? It's yeah, it would be incredibly messy, and I don't think it would last very long at all. There are, of course, huge problems, both sides now built into the nature of how any deal would actually work and what concessions either side would actually have to give to make it work. Again, what's in it for both sides? What concessions? I don't see either side willing to make concessions. And as I've said before, especially in politics, concessions matter. Like willing to make concessions so you can build political bridges, so you can build alliances. Like making concessions matters a lot in politics. So we also do recognize that there are very senior politicians on both sides who will never countenance a deal. These two parties are, of course, not the same. There are, of course, reasons why conservative characters and reform would dearly just like to jump to them and haven't done so. Equally, voter commitment to reform seems solid for now, and the Conservative Party can see that. Really? Voter commitment seems solid? Seven wins out of 180 plus by-elections since the last general election. Really solid that. Anyway, there are also, of course, Tories who do firmly believe that the Conservative tortoise will eventually finish before the Reform hare. And this is entirely subject to its red herring, that there is no deal that is only a good deal. Don't be defeatist, they say. As experiment goes, this was probably as flawed as any deal, of course, might be, but it did demonstrate there are at least some areas of discussion where they could take place. They might, of course, happen on the fringes, despite what both parties' leadership teams decree. Conservative Home will certainly keep abreast of those who think that this pact is inevitable and want to try and lay the groundwork. So ultimately, for the next 4 years, we're going to see these conversations played out on Conservative Home for the next couple of years. Yay. what joy, because someone will write a blog that says a conservative pact is entirely possible, then someone else will come along and say no, a pact is just not feasible at all. how will that form a cohesive government without it ripping apart at the first hurdle? Anyway, the general feeling, of course, after our experiment was it was a lot harder than it actually looks to get it right. And it won't happen at least for a couple of years yet, if it ever does. As he reaches 100 days as leader, and we are very aware that she is of the party's current position, Kimmy Badenoch and her team tell me that they are determined to rebuild a purely conservative offer for the next election, one that can win on its own merit. It is still, of course, underpriced outcome in my view, but there are still plenty of readers on this site, members, councillors, and one suspect MPs who aren't yet convinced. So, yeah, just go to show you, still a lot of conservatives very, very unconvinced by Kimmy Badenoch. And like I say, Conservative Home polling, she has taken a massive tumble to the fact that she lost to Mel Stride, of all people, the comedy candidate at the last Conservative election. Yeah, that's pretty concerning, to be honest, if you are taking such a tumble like that in the polls so quickly. And at some point, I can guarantee you, someone will write 100 days of Kimmy Badenoch as leader. What has she done? What has she done as leader? Right? So this, of course, cannot be ignored. My only doubt, of course, about a fixed no deal position goes back, to, of course, to electoral maths. Depending on the numbers in this discussion about discussions isn't going to go away yet. And for many, the same reason why it may become a reality. Why this seems certain is the need to fend off and be denied is an opinion by both parties, right up until the very moment it happens, if it ever does. And then you can go into the comments here. About this, and they're all just so arguing, of course, with each other about the merits of this. Like some saying very brave pro-reform, others pro-conservative. But of course, you see once again why such a pact would not work. Guys, one of the things Nigel Farage has learned, is to be very loud. And he's very, very good at getting attention. And just because he happens to be the loudest voice in the room, you should maybe asking, well, actually, how many people are paying attention? How many people are actually listening? As I said, when you look electorally, 7 wins out of 180 plus by-elections that have been very recently isn't very good. Especially when, oh my god, they're ahead in all these polls. If they're so popular, why aren't they winning more? But, of course, as always, thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you think down below as well. Do you think a Reform-Tory pact could happen? Do you think it is feasible in any way, shape, or form? I still think it is absolutely, completely undoable and will never, ever happen. I think there is a large section of the Tory party that would just balk at the idea of joining with Reform. And then what do you do with them? Because they're going to probably leave the party. Probably, maybe even go join the Lib Dems. But as always, thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you think down below. And of course, hit the like and share on your way out. And of course, we'll see you all next time.